Yes. You can come forward here. This is good. Yes. Let's make a little.
Keep it to one side.
Yes, that's right. And yeah, that's hard, right? We're going to make a poem, a living poem today. Okay. Okay, and then make it.
I remember 30 years ago when I got to speak from the pulpit here and acknowledge my father on Father's Day, and that was great.
Say his name.
Harold Bryden.
Presente. Okay.
I remember my father, Jim Feeney, whose stories about being an actual madman on Madison Avenue in the 60s were amazing, including having Bob Guccione introduce him to Corbidal. James Feeney.
Presente.
Presente.
I remember my mother, Dr. Elizabeth Sherman Arnold, and at the end of her life, she was bedridden. And she had just taken a bowel movement, and as I was cleaning out the, the tray thing, she said, "That was great!" And then she looked at me and said, "Well, maybe not for you." Oh, Dr. Elizabeth Sherman Arnold.
Presente.
Yes, I miss my husband, Les Gottesman, who was incredibly smart, and we trove the world together, and I miss him a lot.
Say his name again.
Les Gottesman.
Presente.
I remember my wonderful dad who played the mandolin beautifully. What's his name? His name, Irving Miller.
Presente.
Trudy Lionel. I remember one time we had dinner with her, and she ate 6 beignets. Trudy Lionel.
Presente.
I remember my grandmother, Mama Dupree, my first memory in life. I knew something special was going to go on. And she went out in her corset with an axe and took a head off a chicken. And I got my wishbone for lunch.
Say her name again.
Mama Dupree.
Mama Dupree.
Presente.
I remember my grandparents, Marnie and Herb, and I remember the great dinner parties, Marnie and Herb.
Presente.
I remember my brother-in-law, Bob Bowling, who was a person of valor and kindness. Bob Bowling.
Presente.
I remember my abuelo, Miguel Ángel Gómez Arabia, and his wonderful singing voice that carried on through the entire village. Miguel Ángel Gómez Arabia.
Presente.
This is a picture of my grandmother at age 5 when she went to the orphanage. And I remember through her entire life, she kept saying, "You're strong. You can do anything you decide to do." Pearl Jennings Hastings.
Presente.
I remember my best friend Olivia, and sorry.
It's okay. Can you tell her name again? Say her name.
Melissa?
Melissa?
No, Olivia Rowe.
Olivia Rowe. Presente.
I remember Miriam Fedipleshik. She was my mother. She lived and lived the essence of Universalism. She's a good example of how you don't talk about your religion. You are who you are as a Universalist. Her name again? Miriam Fedipleshik.
Presente.
I miss my grandma, Donna Davis, but I've always known her as Gingin. The last memory I have with her was a Christmas in around 2016, and it was one of the best Christmas I had. I miss her a lot because that was the last time I saw her.
Say her name again.
Gingin.
Presente. Stephen Philip Brock, my little brother who crossed over this past summer. I remember he loved flowers, and I remember mostly He always listened to me. Stephen Philip Brock.
Presente. Put it here. Thank you. All right.
I remember my great-grandma Gloria, where she raised her family here in the city. I remember I'd always go to Pacific Cafe, and every single time she would order the fried shrimp for years.
Say your name again.
Gloria Love.
Presente.
I remember my mother, Jean Coyle, used to sing Suliram, which is an Indonesian lullaby to soothe me to sleep. Jean Coyle.
Presente. Helen Aurora Chianisi, member of this congregation, who was taken from us much too young. I remember her beautiful little girl energy. Helen Aurora Chianisi.
I remember Leslie Rife, who died almost 20 years ago, my second husband. I remember love that was too stubborn to give up.
Say his name again.
Leslie Rife.
Presente.
I remember my mother-in-law, Marbeth Munn, and every time I sing, I can see her sitting in that corner smiling at all of the beautiful music in this beautiful space. Marbeth Munn.
Presente.
I remember my brother Mark and my mother Hannah, for whom I'm named, and a dear memory I have of both of them is sitting around a campfire on Lake Michigan singing together. Mark Clements and Hannah Clements.
Presente.
I remember my mother, Carol Tanner, who passed away in January of this year. A few years back, I flew home to surprise her for her 70th birthday, and the look on her face when I entered the room was just, and the hug she gave me was so genuine and so full of love, and I remember her hugs. Carol Tanner.
Presente.
I remember my father, Sam Meyer, who passed away this February at age 99, for his kindness and his devotion to his family. Sam Meyer.
Presente.
I remember my mother, Marbeth Munn. I remember that she loved playing the little bells in the bells choir. Marbeth Munn. Presente.
I remember my dad, who I called Papa, Steve Dolowitz, and I remember how he always made me laugh and my friends laugh by doing things like walk down my dorm room hallway wearing my robe over his clothes and an umbrella hat. Steve Dolowitz.
Presente. I'll put him next to my puppy. Oh, sorry.
I remember my wife, Shirley Gibson, who brought me into this church and gave me two beautiful children and the best part of my life, Shirley Gibson.
Presente.
I remember Michael Ritter, our wonderful neighbor who was taken too soon. He was a counselor at SF State, very active in the gay community, and it was a huge outpouring of support at his funeral. I had no idea, because he's just a neighbor that we loved. Michael Ritter.
Presente.
I remember my friend Robert Greenhouse, who would write long songs about historical disasters and sing them with great passion. Robert Greenhouse.
Presente. I remember my father and his books, and the two books that stay with me now, Final Reports and Arrivals and Departure. He nourishes me still. Richard Rovere. Presente.
Yeah. This is to remember Sasha Cohen, the sister of my speech and music therapy teacher, who passed away.
Say her name again.
Sasha Cohen.
Presente.
I remember my Uncle Ron, West Point graduate and Vietnam veteran. When I returned from a semester abroad in Europe, I landed at Dulles and passed through customs, and when the doors finally opened to let me into the main part of the airport, there waiting with a luggage cart and a huge smile on his face to welcome me back to the United States and back to the family was the first family I'd seen in 6 months, my Uncle Ron. Ron Bailey.
Presente.
I remember Jackie Hyder, faithful fool, and here she's getting ready to sleep on the streets, and she's radiant as she can be with her cardboard that she's going to sleep on. She spread radiance wherever she went. She died 2 weeks ago. Jackie Hyder. Oh, and I have another one. This is Father Louis Vitale, dear friend, and he's with Kay Jorgensen because he was always with people. And he loved being with people, and people loved being with him. And he was a tireless activist who once crawled under, the FBI was arresting an activist and a group of veterans, and he simply, who were trying to stop the war, and he simply crawled under their vehicle so they couldn't move it. And they were so impressed that they actually let them out. Father Louis Vitale. Presente.
I remember John Francis Pepka, my upstairs neighbor of 15 years, who was a Vietnam veteran and suffered from Agent Orange for 50 years. And he finally is in his resting place. John Francis Pepka.
Presente.
So I remember my father, who did projects for anyone and everyone, and then they didn't go well often, and he would tell the story about, make fun of himself afterwards. His name is Raymond Fenn Jr.
Presente.
I remember my Uncle Mike Lang, who we lost this year, who was a great friend to his friends, and my grandma Nancy Lang, who we also lost this year, who had a sharp sense of humor and a profound faith. So Mike Lang and Nancy Lang.
Presente.
The Reverend Carolyn Owentoll died this week. She was my more than worthy opponent for the presidency of our denomination 30 years ago. She had a great eye. We went to museums together. Carolyn Owentoll.
Clara V. Macaulay, my aunt who passed about 6 days ago. And I remember our last phone conversation, we couldn't stop laughing. She couldn't stop giving life advice, unsolicited. But it was rich advice, and I will take it with me. Clara V. Macaulay.
Presente.
I remember my dad, who adored being a dad, and he built me a handmade little sailboat when I was a teenager. Jeff Jeffries.
Presente.
I remember my cousin Marcia Flick, who died 2 weeks ago, and the times when we were children with our siblings, we'd go on tractor rides on the farm where my dad grew up in Indiana. Marcia Flick.
Presente.
I remember my partner, Patricia Kearns, who got arrested with Dolores Priam Hilbron in 2008 for protesting the war in Afghanistan and had everybody in stitches because that was her way. She had the biggest smile and the best sense of humor. And she was also a nurse at the breast care center and was given the top award for paying attention to her patients. I remember Patricia Kearns.
Presente.
I remember my friend Nick, who, when we had disagreements, was almost always right. Nick Welshman.
Presente.
I remember my grandfather, who loved the outdoors, especially Yosemite and Half Dome, which he climbed 3 times. Carl Smith.
Presente.
Presente.
I remember my grandparents' generation and the immigrant energy and traditions that I miss so much today. I'm not going to name them all, but Luigi and Gardina and Lucia and Giuseppe and all the others.
Presente.
I remember my maternal grandmother when I was younger, watching Golden Girls together, and when I was older, long conversations on her patio over cheap boxed wine. Livonia Nelson.
Presente. Is there anybody that'd like us to come to you? Oh, here we go.
I did not actually say anything about my father, just that I acknowledged him here. And I think
Raj Desai, who is responsible for a lot of the seismically sound buildings in San Francisco, and a beautiful family, but also apparently gave the best docent tours at the Asian Art Museum. Carol Johnson, she has a beautiful family, who was an attorney, one of the first in her law school, and a trailblazer, and as gentle and sweet also as they come. So the full spectrum of human expression in her extraordinary life. And of course, the Heilbruns both left their fingerprints all over this congregation, but also all over the city, in the kind of institutional reaching in and fortifying of your values through things that carry on, as did Carol and Raj. People who are missed deeply here, but whose legacy carries on.
Is there anybody that'd like us to come to you? Anybody? Okay. Thank you.
I have one last symbol for our altar. So pomegranate, a traditional symbol for fertility, for all the ancestors that lived, especially for my mother-in-law who passed away 2 years ago, whose fierce intelligence and love of culture and love of family and so many things else made her a trailblazer in her Indian community. For my grandmother Hendrika, who immigrated to this country late in life, which was hard, and my grandmother Marie, who was orphaned at 16 in the Depression, and who all went on to lead gorgeous lives and bear fruit. And I think we all have people who weathered inordinate challenges to live on with as much grace and courage and wisdom as they could, oftentimes leaving many marks, but the mark for which I am most grateful are all of the people here. So for all of them, all of our ancestors, we say, Presente.
Presente.